And so your experience at the Seattle Times, what kind of stories did you work on?
When I was at the Seattle Times, I worked on general assignment stories, I worked on general interest stories, I covered courts. It was my first experience ever going down to the Seattle courthouse and sitting in on arraignments, and as well as doing day-to-day some small cop stories as well as business stories. They would bounce me around from different departments, and then within those departments they would give me assignments. Like one of my assignments was to go over to Bainbridge, and it was basically a general interest story on people who worked in Seattle and lived on the island. And so those were the kind of stories that I did when I was in Seattle, which gave me a foundation and gave me an opportunity to go out into the community, take notes, come back and write my stories and work with an editor and work with the copy editors to get the stories published.
Nice. And then when you went to the LA Times, what kind of stories did you work on there?
When I was at the Los Angeles Times, I worked on general assignment stories. My first assignment at the Los Angeles Times was a car wreck. It was a very, very terrible car accident, and of course, it was my first time seeing dead bodies. These teenagers were in a Hyundai and they were driving fast and they were going to a park. They were taking a curb and they hit the curb. The car went airborne, and because they did not have on seat belts, they were ejected from the car. All of them passed away except for one who landed on his feet, and the other friends, the car landed on top of them. So that was my very first assignment, was to go out into the middle of the city during the height of traffic, and I had to actually report on what was happening with the family and with the teenagers who had passed away.
And what were some of your other stories that you handled in New York?
When I was back east, I was actually stationed in Connecticut. I lived in New Haven and I covered Greenwich, which was at that time one of the wealthiest towns in the nation. I had an opportunity to cover Alexander Graham Bell Hearst's grandmother and their charity. I covered education mostly on the Greenwich school system, which at that time was one of the best school systems in the nation, and they had the highest teachers pay in the nation. So it was an opportunity for me to see how an excellent school district was run and the kind of issues that parents were concerned with. And at that time, a big issue was the stratification of students and students being tracked. Some parents were against the tracking program and studying certain students and gifted and talented, and others were not identified for gifted and talented, and that was a big issue in the community of which students were going to be tracked and which ones were not going to be tracked. Some parents, and it turned out to be the majority, wanted no tracking at all.
That's really fascinating that all of the different places that you went, you handled all sorts of variety of stories. And that's remarkable that you then came up with the idea of, yeah, maybe I should write a book. You know, what is my interest and what is the kind of topics that I'm interested in?
I would say when people ask me how do I come up with ideas, one thing that I learned as a reporter that I picked up really quickly from the copy editors and the editors on the desk, they told me that I was really good with coming up with great stories. One of the stories that I came up with was I was covering for another reporter at a meeting, a town meeting, and the town was very upset because one of their neighbors had on his license plate, he had for jihad. Now for jihad was his name. And so I immediately picked up on the fact that this could be potentially a big story. And so I brought it back to the main reporter. First I brought it back to the city desk and I said, I think this is a story. And they said, we think it's a story too, but you have to bring, the right thing to do is to bring it to the main reporter and it's their beat and see what they think. So I brought it to the main reporter and she said, no, there's no story here. And then she spent all night writing the story and it made national news. But
nice.
That taught me that I know what a good story is.
How neat. Wow. And tell me a little bit about How did you get from Greenwich back to LA?
I got from Greenwich back to LA because I applied for graduate school. I had made up in my mind that I wanted to tell stories in a different way, and I wanted to tell stories in a way that expanded the boundaries of just sticking to the facts and sticking to reality. I wanted to be able to tell stories that involved fiction and involved imagination. And though I loved being a reporter, it was pretty limiting to me. It had become kind of routine.
Nice. So we have been listening to Anita Cowan, and give us the name of your new book.
The name of my book is Eighth Wonder, the Thomas Bethune story.
Thank you.
It's the story of the Black Mozart.
Thank you. And we're going to be talking with you again about your book and about your life. And thank you for being on my show, Public Interest Issues.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.